We're coming on the air with a big verdict in Minnesota. The former cop who says she meant to pull her taser instead of a gun when she shot Daunte Wright found guilty of manslaughter. She now faces decades in prison. We're live outside the courthouse, and we're one-on-one with Wright's mom with more on why she believes this is justice for her son in just a sec. Plus, with the holidays finally here, you're probably scrambling to find a COVID test, right? You've got company with lines stretching for blocks and not a lot to go around. We've got more answers from a doctor today and new details on a treatment approved not too long ago. Plus, you could say Christmas and the NBA go together like Santa and cookies, but some of the game's biggest stars will not be on the court. We'll talk about why the league's worried about its holiday slate as we're now learning the pandemic might jeopardize the college football championships. And Russian President Vladimir Putin not backing his troops away from the border with Ukraine. The world doesn't want him to go to war, but NATO and the U.S. aren't giving in to his demands. So is Putin near his breaking point? And listen, 2021's been a lot. The pandemic, the economy, maybe you launched a new show. The last thing you want on New Year's is a champagne hangover, and there might be a way around that with booze-free booze. We'll take a look at how to have yourself a very merry, sober, curious Christmas in tonight's original. Hey, I'm Hallie, and we're starting with that breaking news out of Minnesota. Former Brooklyn Center police officer Kim Potter convicted of first and second degree manslaughter just in the last few hours. You probably watched it live here, right here on this network as this was breaking. It happened in the shooting death of a 20-year-old black man, Daunte Wright, at a traffic stop last April. Potter has said she thought she was drawing her taser, not her gun, but the prosecution called it reckless. But tonight, Wright's mother reacting to all of it. Watch.
I kind of let out a yelp because it was built up in the anticipation of what was to come while we were waiting for the last few days. And now we've been able to process it.
The judge putting Potter into custody without bail ahead of her sentencing in February. This was her. She was receiving the verdict. You can see she didn't really show much emotion as that happened. And then later she was let out of the courtroom in handcuffs. The first-degree manslaughter charge, carrying a maximum of 15 years in prison. The second-degree charge, a maximum of 10 years. Then outside the courthouse, as all this happened, celebrations. That they're chanting. We're going to have more from Wright's mother, Katie, in just a minute. But let me go to Minneapolis first, where we find Shaq Brewster. Shaq, it's good to be with you. Guilty on both charges for Kim Potter, right? Tell us a little bit more. We just saw what it looked like outside the courtroom. What was it like inside the courtroom as these charges were read?
Well, Hallie, according to those pool reporters, the account from the two reporters who were in the room as these charges were being read, they mentioned what you heard from Katie Bryant there, that she yelled out a scream almost. She yelled out a cry when she heard those guilty verdicts. We also saw that there was not much reaction from Kim Potter herself, but one reaction you did see was from one of the jurors as the judge started to thank the jury and call them heroes for the work that they've done, especially in the past 27 hours as they were deliberating. One of the jurors got extremely emotional. We believe it was the foreperson of this jury. And as Kim Potter was being escorted out that courtroom in handcuffs, her husband yelled out, "I love you, Kim," and she replied, "I love you back."
It's been a case that so many people are watching, Shaq, because it is part of the conversation that we've been having nationally, right? About race, about policing. Right. This has touched a nerve among so many people around the country.
That's exactly right. And you saw that reaction and that relief outside of the courtroom. So many people telling me outside as they were celebrating that verdict, telling me that they were surprised that it was that verdict. Not only was it that 27 hours of deliberation, but they also got the sense from that initial message from the court, which said that an outcome would be released. They were doubtful that that outcome was even going to be a verdict. They were fearing a mistrial, and there were celebrations outside. But so many people also underscoring that despite this verdict, it's not justice in their words. They say Daunte Wright will never come back. Katie Bryant will have to deal with that empty seat at the Christmas table, but they're relieved that there's some accountability in their words.
And that's what we've heard so often, Shaq, over these last months, justice versus accountability, right? You look at the next step for Kim Potter. She will be sentenced. Talk through the timeline on that.
that sentencing coming in February, late February. I believe it's February 18th. And you mentioned the maximum sentence. She'll be sentenced on the highest charge, so that maximum sentence of 15 years in prison. It's not clear exactly how many of those years she'll get. And I say that because sentencing guidelines in this state set that number between around 7.5 years. But the prosecution is going to ask and argue for aggravating factors, one being that she was an officer in a position of power and that she abused that power, they're saying. So there's a chance that you can get somewhere closer to that 15-year maximum. That's something that's going to be hashed out between the prosecution and the defense and the judge all the way up until that February 18th date. Hallie?
Shaq Brewster, live for us there in Minnesota. Shaq, thank you so much. I appreciate it. I want to bring in now Katie Bryant. You heard Shaquille reference her, Daunte Wright's mother. Her attorney, Jeff Storms, is with us as well. Katie and Mr. Storms, thank you so much for being with us this afternoon. Katie, let me just ask you, I know this has just developed in the last few hours. How are you doing?
I'm still emotional. It's been a lot of tension and stress and anticipation. Just the buildup of the verdict being read was pretty stressful and emotional.
I can imagine. Have you had a chance to process it? Where are you where's your head at the moment?
I'm still just feeling like in disbelief that both counts came back guilty, and we're still processing it. We're still processing our son's death, much less the verdict.
Right.
So.
Right. I don't know if you heard my conversation with my colleague Shaq Brewster, who's our correspondent on the ground there, but we were talking about this idea of justice versus accountability. So I wonder, in your view, these two guilty counts, is that justice or is that accountability, or is it something else altogether for you?
I think for our family and myself, it is accountability. And we thank everybody who stood by us to help us, get to this point. But I think even just for future policing, it's a big eye-opener.
Mr. Storms, can you talk a little bit more about that, too, about Katie's point here that, as you say, Katie, you believe it's a big eye-opener, and how this verdict fits into that bigger conversation about race and about policing?
Well, a big part of it is, for the longest time, prosecutors didn't really have the courage to bring these types of prosecutions. And Keith Ellison and his team have shown now twice that if you do have that courage, if you do pursue just charges against law enforcement when they use unlawful deadly force, juries are ready to hold them accountable like they would anyone else. And we hope that, prosecutors around the country see that a predominantly white jury held Kim Potter accountable, and know that lives like Daunte Wright's lives matter.
Katie, how do you hope the world remembers your son? What do you hope his legacy is?
A 20-year-old man, loving his family, his son, and to continue to say his name, so that way we don't have any more Daunte Wrights. We don't have so many names that have been shouted in our streets in America.
And his name shouted by those people who gathered outside the courthouse, as we showed just a couple minutes ago today. You talked about how you hope this is eye-opening for people. Can you tell me more about what you mean by that?
Just the fact that policing in our country has to have some type of change. And, this is baby steps to the bigger problem and the bigger picture in our policing. And
I imagine you will keep fighting.
I will continue to fight until we don't have to fight anymore.
Katie Bryant, Jeff Storms, thank you both so much for being with us. We really appreciate your time. I know it's been a difficult and emotional day for you both. Thank you.
Thank you.
I want to bring in now MSNBC legal analyst Kristen Gibbons-Fedden, a former prosecutor and civil rights attorney. Kristen, I don't know if you had a chance to hear that conversation right there with Daunte Wright's mother, who talked about, still processing this. This was a jury deliberation that went on for 4 days, 27.5 hours. Talk about, based on what little we know from the few questions that they did ask, what tea leaves you can read about what might have been going on in the deliberation room, and any reaction that you might have to our interview just now.
I think unquestionably, as deliberations went from day 1 into day 2, from day 2 into day 3, and on, I think the most important thing I was thinking about was the heartbreak that Daunte Wright's mom, Ms. Bryant, is feeling continuously. But I think one of the things that made it a little bit better was simultaneously to asking a question that indicated that they were deadlocked. was the fact that they also wanted to feel the gun. So it seemed like to me, if I were to read the tea leaves, that they at least found guilt on the manslaughter 2, but that they were having some questions regarding the recklessness factor and the culpability for manslaughter 1. So at least there was some accountability there. But again, as the deliberations go on, it's heartbreaking for the family because it indicates that they may not reach a verdict, or that there's so much doubt that the prosecution didn't meet their burden.
One of the things that you and I have talked about, I've talked about with others here on this show and elsewhere, is the idea of, bringing a defendant forward to testify in their own defense. We saw that from Kim Potter, right? She was in tears. She apologized for what she did, said she never meant to kill anybody. Obviously, in hindsight, now clearly it didn't help her case, right? Because she was found guilty on these 2 charges of manslaughter. But do you think it was a misstep by the defense to put her up there, or was it, even with these charges, did they almost need to do it to give themselves a shot? What's your sense of that?
So I think in this case, they needed to put her on. But in terms of a misstep, should she have been better prepped? Perhaps that's the better question. Because when she went on the stand, her emotions were inconsistent with the video that was played thereafter, which showed that she was really concerned about herself, jail time. She didn't render any aid. She was crying, but again, concerned with herself and what penalties she may face. When in reality, there's a man bleeding out. There was no indication to help him or the passenger in the car or the 2 occupants in the car that was hit. So I think her testimony and the showing of remorse was somewhat inconsistent. In addition to that, some of the things that she said didn't really help her case. Seeing Sergeant Johnson looking in fear was also inconsistent with the video footage. So I don't think it helped her case at all.
Realistically, what kind of prison time is she looking at? We talked about at the top of the show, she faces years potentially in prison, but what is practically what she might end up with in your view?
Well, as Shaq mentioned, the guidelines call for about 7 years on the first degree and about 4 years on the second degree. It's likely the judge will hold them concurrent, which means at the same time. So she will serve the 4 years within her second degree at the same time she's serving the 7 years. So it'll be a maximum of 7 year sentence. But the prosecutors do seek departure from those sentencing guidelines, specifically in the aggravated range. For abusive position of power or authority, or the substantial risk that her crime had to the community at large. In addition to that, you're going to hear victim impact statements. Hallie, Ms. Bryant's statements alone, with you speaking to her, were heartbreaking to me. Imagine what they'll do to the judge. So they're going to hear from her. They're going to hear from Daunte Wright's dad. They'll probably hear from the mother of his child. And so that's going to be impactful. So I'm thinking probably somewhere above the 7 year sentence, and maybe likely anywhere from 8 to 9 to 10 years.
Kristen Gibbons-Fedden, thank you so much. It's great to have you on the show and for your legal perspective on this. Appreciate it. Our other big headline tonight, it is Omicron, right? And the holiday scramble for tests before people head home to visit their families. And take a look at the video we're about to show you from our friends over at WNBC up in their chopper. You're going to see lines stretching down the block. Look at this. Those are people in line for hours in Manhattan, in Brooklyn, in Staten Island. Does it look like that where you live? Maybe, maybe not. Looks like that in D.C. in some spots. You see it on the screen here. This is the 6th straight day with a new case record for New York with nearly 39,000 in all. That's 10,000 more than yesterday, 12% positivity rate. And check it out. You can see from this chart that Omicron's dominance has already pushed past the peak of Delta with more than 168,000 cases. But listen, still a far cry from the worst day of the pandemic back in January with more than 250,000 cases. We're covering this from all angles today. Sam Brock is live with us to talk about those testing shortfalls. Dr. Natalie Azar will try to walk us through the holidays in the safest way possible. But I want to kick things off with Meg Terrell. With the word of this new treatment, another one approved today, right? You got Merck and this pill for people who are already infected with COVID. We talked about this Pfizer pill yesterday. This Merck pill says it's 30% effective in preventing hospitalization or death among high-risk patients. Requires a lot of pills. Viewers should know this is not a replacement for getting vaccinated, right? But Meg, talk about how this fits into our treatment and our fight against this pandemic.
Yeah, absolutely. So experts were really waiting for this option, and now we have 2. These pills you can take at home early in the course of the disease, and they've shown to reduce the risk of hospitalization and death. Both of these pills are cleared only for people at high risk of developing severe COVID. Pfizer's is cleared for everybody over 12, and Merck's for everybody over 18. Now, they did have different efficacy numbers. Merck's was 30%, Pfizer's was almost 90%. You've got to take this within the first 5 days of symptoms. And Merck's is indicated only for folks who cannot take another treatment because of either accessibility or appropriateness. Both of these have some safety issues, so there'll be different indications for different groups of people.
Talk about the COVID medicine cabinet as we look ahead to next month, right? Is it enough to fight what doctors think will be the spike in cases?
Yeah, it's looking like not enough right away, especially the Pfizer drug. There's only going to be 265,000 courses available by the end of January. There's more of the Merck drug, 3 million courses. And of course, that's why it's good to have these other options for folks who are really at high risk. But Omicron came along with a lot of mutations. And so those antibody drugs that we'd been depending on over the summer a lot, some of those got wiped out. So we've got a couple options there, but supply is limited of those too. So of course, there's a lot of emphasis, as there has always been, get vaccinated, get boosted. So hopefully you won't need one of these.
That message we keep coming back to. Meg Terrell, thank you so much for that. Appreciate it. I want to head down to Miami where Sam Brock is posted up. And Sam, you have been, I feel like you live now at this testing site. You just set up a tent.
I do.
It is your new home.
I have a tent over my shoulder.
Listen. Probably half the people in line might be thinking that's a good idea at this point for how long they've been waiting, right? You look at Harvard's COVID tracker, they're saying that we got to do 20 million tests every day to really get to a place where we're all comfortable and can reopen. At our peak of the pandemic, we did 2 million, right? 1.5 million now. Go ahead, Sam.
I was going to say that 20 million figure is huge. It's not clear, Hallie, whether or not that's what demand is going to require. But one thing is very clear. We are not meeting demand right now, because if we were, you would not see the massive line of cars behind me that's been a carousel for the last several days. This has gone on nonstop. And unfortunately, there's people here that are running out of gas, Hallie. There's other folks who have their cars breaking down and they're stuck out here in the sun for hours. We've seen that just in the last couple of days. The Biden administration did pledge billions of dollars to bring 200 million tests to American homes starting in December. We are in December. Store shelves right now, as you likely know, are empty. So that is a problem. But I don't want to just be the harbinger of bad news here. Let me give you some good stuff, which is that there's about a dozen companies right now making these at-home tests. Abbott, for example, is one of the pharmaceutical companies doing that. It has Binax now. It says it's going to be boosting its production from 50 million a month to 70 million a month, hiring more workers, more shifts, subcontracting if necessary, whatever they got to do to boost production. So companies are on top of this right now.
What's interesting, Sam, listen, there was always this, experts were always talking about the potential for the COVID virus to mutate and for these variants to come up. Omicron seemed to take us, like me and you and sort of lay people, a little bit by surprise, because all of a sudden it was in South Africa, then it was here. But some experts you're talking with say Omicron's probably been here for a little bit.
That's exactly right. So I spoke with Dr. Eileen Marty, who is one of the top infectious disease experts in the country. She worked for the Obama administration for years. She said there's a couple of misconceptions about Omicron. One of them is that it just sprang up. There was almost certainly an evolution that took place for months, likely in the spring, before we're now feeling the effects. The other thing she said, this whole notion that it's a milder strain is likely wrong. We don't know that. She said, molecularly speaking, there's nothing in the variant that indicates it's milder. It's just that there's much more vaccination right now. We have more built-in protection in our bodies, preventing that progression of the disease. She also said there's a lot of reinfection going on right now. So this much, though, is undeniable. Here's what Dr. Marty told me.
There's nothing to indicate that it would be milder. There's a lot to indicate it would be more transmissible, and it is more transmissible. That it is appearing milder is exactly what we want as an effect of the vaccine.
There are, Hallie, some numbers out of South Africa right now showing that cases there are beginning to dip by about 20%. Yeah. So the hope is we're going to see that same sort of meteoric peak here in the United States, and that numbers would follow the same trajectory if we are doing the same things they did in South Africa as well. And that includes not gathering in large groups. And all these people behind me right now are likely going to see loved ones for the holidays. That could prove to be problematic.
Sam Brock, live for us there in Miami. Sam, thank you so much. Appreciate it. I want to go to Dr. Natalie Azar. So, Dr. Natalie, let's talk about this Omicron data, right, that's coming in from the UK. It shows it's 50 to 70% less severe than Delta. This confirms, right, what you and I have been talking about for days here, that anecdotally, at first, it seemed like Omicron was more mild than Delta. However, that doesn't mean, like, yay, Omicron, right? Because the vaccine is less effective also against Omicron. Yeah. But what about the booster, right? If you are boosted and you are recently boosted, should you feel pretty good that you have at least the most armor you can have against this variant?
Yeah, definitely, Hallie. But even that is short-lived. I mean, our antibody levels really reach their maximum after a vaccine or after a booster at about 4 weeks.
Okay.
And then they steadily decline. And that's why we have this, the 6-month recommendation to boost was because we followed antibody levels out and we saw that they really, really declined significantly. So yeah, like that first few weeks after the 2 weeks that you receive your vaccine, you definitely have your thickest armor, but it does start to decline. And just as a reminder to everybody, those antibodies just protect against infection. It doesn't have anything really to do with preventing severe disease, which, as we've now talked about ad nauseum, is other arms of the immune system that should still be intact.
That's a good point. So holidays are coming up. I'm sure you just saw Sam Brock, standing at the line where there's a billion people, not really a billion, there's a lot of people in line, waiting for these tests. If you can't get one, right? Because I think that some people are facing this situation where they really want to see family, they cannot find a test. What is your next best option if you do see family and cannot get tested? Would you say at that point, definitely mask up? Would you say cancel altogether?
You know what? It's not a one size fits all. And we have really said from the beginning, Hallie, that it is each family's individual risk tolerance, right? And they have to calibrate their behavior, what I would say, based on the most vulnerable person in your circle or in your orbit. So if you're, amongst family and friends, no one's immunocompromised, everyone understands that there could be a breakthrough infection and everyone's okay with that, and go ahead and gather, right? But if you're going to come home to an elderly parent or you have an unvaccinated child, or, you're going to be traveling and it might affect your work or school, you need to be very thoughtful about this. We just canceled our Christmas. We just canceled a holiday trip to a vacation to Florida for a variety of different reasons. But we made a decision as a family that none of us wanted to get a breakthrough infection for different reasons. And we made the decision. It's not easy, Hallie, but, health comes first.
Got to tell you, I got to think, Dr. Natalie, going through the same thing personally. I know so many families are going through the same exact sort of risk assessment process for themselves.
Yeah, that's what you have to do, Hallie.
Great to see you. Have a great holiday. I think the next time we'll talk is going to be in 2022. Hopefully we'll have some good news to talk about in January on this front. Thanks, Dr. Natalie.
I hope so too. Bye.
To Washington now. It's the only place where we have a reason to talk to you about the 2024 presidential election before we even hit the midterms. But there is a reason for this, right? That's because President Biden is telling ABC News he would run again for president in the next election. Listen to how he framed it.
Do you plan to run for re-election?
Yes. But look, I'm a great respecter of fate. Fate has intervened in my life many, many times. If I'm in the health I'm in now, if I'm in good health, then, in fact, I would run again.
The president went on to say that if former President Donald Trump ran and was the opposing nominee, that would actually increase President Biden's chances, the prospect that he runs again. This end-of-the-year announcement coming at a time when the White House is trying to fight this pandemic, this recent surge, as we've talked about, and battling to get the president's Build Back Better bill over the finish line. We'll see how the new year unfolds. And in a kind of it's not us, it's you blame game, the White House today is clapping back at the Russian president, saying the only aggression they're seeing at the Russian-Ukrainian border is Russia's. Russia's fault, Russia's troops. That's after Vladimir Putin blamed the U.S. and NATO allies for those tensions in Ukraine during his annual year-end news conference. President Putin still demanding NATO stop expanding into Ukraine, like now, because they see it as a threat to their own borders. Adding, one, they don't want conflict with Ukraine, and two, the ball is in NATO's court to meet this demand, even threatening earlier this week to take adequate military measures if they don't. Remember, we told you about that. Russia has sent more than 100,000 troops to the border, which has raised alarm bells there and here at home, prompting a call between Putin and President Biden earlier this month, with the White House today saying they're prepared to meet in early January. I want to bring in Keir Simmons now, who, Keir, you are on your longest day ever. I'm so grateful to you for staying with us because I know you were at this, you do these year-end news conferences with Putin. You now give us the analysis here because you have Putin, is he getting closer to a breaking point, right? Saying the U.S. could be ready to negotiate in Geneva next month, but we know President Biden doesn't want to give Putin what he's asking for.
That's right, Hallie. I think what you're seeing, which is fascinating with President Putin, he's putting a lot of cards on the table. We're seeing a lot of what he wants. and how he views things. He's really wielding a kind of diplomatic carrot and a stick. So on the one hand, he said today that he believes that there is traction in the talks with Washington. On the other hand, once again, seeming to threaten, seeming to say, listen, you give me what I want, otherwise I can't be responsible for what I might do, if you like, with all those troops on the border. The real question, Hallie, is he asking for the impossible because he doesn't even want these talks to work? Or is this a negotiation? And the answer to that will determine war or peace in Ukraine, Hallie.
Did he say anything else? As somebody who has covered Putin extensively, as our loyal viewers will know, did he say anything else that stood out to you, that kind of caught your ear as you were listening?
I thought one thing was fascinating. When he was challenged by a European reporter, will you pledge not to invade Ukraine even if these negotiations don't work out? That's when you really kind of saw him, in a way, let his guard down and really rant a little bit, if you like, talk about, well, you let us here, NATO is responsible for this. And what that shows you, and we see it again and again with President Putin, is that he constantly goes back to this sense that back in the Gorbachev days, Russia was let down by the West. What he's trying to do is to right what he views as that wrong. Now, of course, the problem, well, there's many problems, but one of the problems, Hallie, is that, of course, those Eastern European countries, many of them, they don't want the influence of Russia. They don't want to be controlled by Russia the way they were under the Soviet Union. So it is as simple as to say, well, America's to blame. There's a lot more going on here. Listen, for President Putin, in some ways, this is a denouement. In the end, he's setting out what he wants. If he doesn't get it, will he lash out in Ukraine? There are many questions. It's going to be fascinating next year.
I think you're absolutely. It always is, Keir. You know, this year-end news conference itself is always interesting. I remember you went. You've been a couple times, a bunch of times, I think. I remember talking to you about stories. You're holding up, you know, NBC signs to try to catch his attention. There's always a lot of topics on the table, but he's not really transparent, right? Isn't that fair to say? Like, I think it's pretty objectively safe to say he's not a very transparent president. Yet this news conference, he tries to give this perspective, like, yeah, I'll take a whole bunch of questions on a bunch of different things.
That's right. Listen, I think it's easy to kind of feel bamboozled, even beguiled by President Putin. I think it's important to cut through what he's really saying. And if you like what he isn't saying, and you ask him a question, as many of those journalists did at that news conference, and he'll give you 5 different answers. But ultimately, though, who he's talking to his domestic audience. He wants to look like a strong man, and he's also talking to Washington and the West. And he has key ambitions. Again, the issue is that a number of those ambitions, particularly when it comes to NATO, are just not something that Washington or Western Europe can agree to. That's the crunch here, Hallie. And how it's resolved, that's the question.
Keir Simmons, live for us tonight. Keir, thank you very much. We'll see you in the new year. Appreciate it. COVID has already hit the sports world pretty hard, as you know, and now the NBA is trying to play defense against it with some pretty big Christmas Day games in jeopardy. We're going to get into it after the break. So sports fans know it's typically not Christmas Day without a full day of basketball. The true sports fans know that. But as everybody knows, nothing about this Christmas is typical. And right now, the NBA is getting ready for the worst. We're talking about some of the game's biggest stars, Trae Young, Kevin Durant, to name just a couple. You see the rest on the screen. And they've all got 2 things in common. They're all in the COVID protocol, and they were all supposed to headline the Christmas Day slate of games. The NBA commissioner, Adam Silver, says we might not know until late tomorrow night, Christmas Eve, if the league's going to have to move around or cancel some of these top-tier games. But even though more than 120 players have entered the protocol this month alone, Silver is not planning to follow the NHL and pause the season. Dan Wolken is here to break this down. He's a national columnist for USA Today Sports. Dan, it's awesome to have you on the show. Thanks for being here.
Thanks, Hallie.
So COVID's hitting the league hard, right? Not just from the players' perspective, but also attendance-wise, right? Our friends at CNBC say it's down 5% because of COVID. This is dollars in owners' pockets, right? Like, this is money. This gets attention. How is the league supposed to respond here, right? Keep the league from getting paused, the season from getting paused when players are, like, dropping left and right.
Yeah, it's tough. I was watching some NBA games last night, and the quality of the product right now just isn't very good because you got so many guys who are just not NBA caliber players who are being put on these teams to just try to bridge the gap. Last night, Joe Johnson was playing. This is a guy who's been out of the league for a few years. Good player in his day, but he's basically retired, and he's playing for the Boston Celtics last night. So the NBA, I think right now, they're just trying to get through these few weeks. And I think what Silver said was really important, which is if we stop the season and pause it right now, well, what would be the trigger that brings us back? If we shut down for a week, what does that really do? And I've talked to a couple people in the epidemiology world, like, they'd really have to shut down for 2 or 3 months to sort of get through all of this. I don't think that's a viable solution. So they're just having to try to get through. And this Christmas Day games are extremely important. I think they're going to do everything they can to play those.
What's interesting, we talk about this, it feels like almost every night here on this show, the intersection of COVID and sports, right? And every league and every sort of group handling it differently. You look at college football, right? And the pandemic's hitting college football hard as they're getting close to the championships. Texas A&M just pulled out of the Gator Bowl. They just don't have enough players. I know you're reporting on how this could affect the national championship. It's a little complicated when it comes to these forfeit rules. So put it in plain English for me here.
Well, so you've got 2 semifinals that are going to be played on New Year's Eve. And basically what the college football playoff has decided is that in any of those 2 games, if one team can't play, if they don't have enough players available to field the team, then they forfeit. And basically the opponent would move on to the national championship game. If both teams in a semifinal can't play, then the other semifinal winner would just be declared the national champion. If 3 of the 4 teams can't play, then basically the one healthy team is the national champion by default. So now what would happen if all 4 teams were basically out? I think it would just be no contest. But the bottom line to it is the semifinals are going to be played on December 31st. They are not movable.
Right.
If a team can't play, then they're just going to move on.
Let me stay on college football for a second here, because to me, what's so interesting about that, and I live in Washington. My other job, aside from this one, is covering politics, right? And that is a sport that really does feel like it transcends the political lines, right? It's super popular in parts of the country where, interestingly, some vaccination rates are a little bit lower. We have a map I want to show folks. 6 of the bottom 10 states by vaccination rates have a team in the SEC. But if the college football championship, Dan, the biggest game of the year, gets canceled or gets affected in some way because of COVID, do you have a sense it could have an effect on fans who might be, vaccine hesitant here, who are watching and hoping to watch some of their favorite players, their favorite college teams, who are seeing the very tangible, real-world impacts of this?
Yeah, I think it's hard to reach people at this point if they haven't already gotten the message on the vaccine. But it's interesting because sports, I think, does bring out the sort of ideological extremes where you've got some people who are just bashing these sports leagues for moving games or canceling games or putting players in COVID protocols, are basically saying, none of these guys are going to be affected significantly. They're young, healthy athletes. Let them play. And then you've got people on the other end of the spectrum basically saying, shut it all down. It's too dangerous to play. And I think the truth is somewhere in the middle here. And there's probably a better way as we evolve on this virus to keep sports going. And maybe minimize disruptions. You're seeing the NBA and the NFL try to maybe lessen the window of time that a positive player has to sit out, especially if they're asymptomatic. I think the NBA is going to maybe try to get it down to about 6 days or something like that. At the same time, you look at it and these stadiums are still full of people. You've still got attendance. And is that really safe? Is that safe for the players? Is that safe for the fans? These are all tough questions, but I just think we're now at the point in this pandemic where all of these leagues feel like they just need to power through it and figure out a way to live with this COVID situation. And there's going to be bumps in the road for sure. But I think I give the leagues credit for maybe ignoring the extremes and focusing on what they need to do to keep in business.
Dan Wolken, great to have you on. Thank you very much for that perspective. Appreciate it. We're talking about Omicron with Dan. We're talking about it this show later, too, because it's not slowing down the holiday travel rush. You got roads and airports right now almost as packed as they were before the pandemic. We've got more on what you should know before you head out the door. Let's get you over to the 5 things our team thinks you should know about tonight. Number 1, revered journalist, beloved novelist Joan Didion has died. She was 87 years old, and her publisher says she died from complications from Parkinson's disease. Didion wrote about the social upheavals of the 1960s, the cultural landscape of California, and the inner struggles of grief, among other things. Number 2, former President Trump wants the Supreme Court to block the January 6th Select Committee from getting White House records from his time in office. He wants the National Archives not to give those lawmakers investigating the Capitol riot hundreds of pages of records. The Supreme Court doesn't have to take the case, and if it doesn't, the Circuit Court's ruling ordering the release of documents will stand. That means those documents will be released. We'll see what happens there. Number 3, cities like Portland and Seattle might get a rare white Christmas this year thanks to a big snowstorm heading their way. For context, the National Weather Service says over the past 100-plus years, Seattle has gotten measurable snowfall on Christmas Day only 7 times. So if this happens, it would certainly be rather extraordinary. Number 4, the TSA and FAA are stepping up how they're taking on bad behavior on flights. The two groups say travelers who cause trouble can lose their pre-check credentials. This year alone, there have been almost 6,000 complaints of bad behavior, most of them concerning people who don't want to wear masks. Number 5, a Hong Kong university has taken down a monument honoring pro-democracy protesters killed during China's Tiananmen Square crackdown in 1989. The statue is called the Pillar of Shame, and many there see it as a public reminder of the lives lost during the massacre. Officials said the decision to remove the monument is in the best interest of the university, but certainly controversial. Believe it or not, and I hate saying these words, but this is our second pandemic Christmas. It is. And Omicron still not stopping a lot of people from traveling for the holidays this year. In fact, AAA says holiday travel is almost back to what it was before the pandemic, but people seem to be making up for lost time after having to cancel so many plans this time last year. Between now and January 2nd, there's expected to be more than 100 million people hitting the road, nearly 6.5 million people at airports, and almost 3 million people getting on buses or trains or using other methods of transportation, like a cruise or perhaps a scooter. Gary Grumbach is on the ground in Newark, Delaware, with more. What's interesting, Gary, a lot of people are going to get in the car this year, and I have to think that has something to do with safety concerns around the pandemic, the sense that at least in your car, you're in your own little bubble, you're not on a plane like a sardine.
Yeah, Hallie, that's definitely part of it. We've been talking to travelers out here that have been gassing up here at the rest stop all day, and they're frankly just frustrated that this is all still ongoing. As you mentioned, the second Christmas pandemic. They say they're vaccinated, they're boosted, and they just want to see family, and they think driving is the safest way to do that. Here's what I heard from some folks this morning.
Stuff, because I didn't want to fly. My family was not that comfortable, so that was the reason.
Now, Hallie, Omicron is so widespread, as we know, that doctors say if you're in a crowded public place, like an airport or like a train station, it's the real good chance that Omicron is too.
I thought it was interesting, and I read this in the last day or so, that the United Airlines CEO, Scott Kirby, says his company has not seen more cancellations on their domestic flights because of Omicron, right? So people seem to not be canceling their trips. I would wonder, are they opting for gatherings that are smaller, fewer people, in order to be safe? Do you have any sense of that?
Yeah, travel company AAA says that more people are telling them they're going to see family and friends this year than those big name destinations. But don't get me wrong, those big name destinations are still definitely going to be crowded. Those places like Anaheim, California, Orlando, Florida. But, there's also this cost-benefit analysis, risk-benefit analysis to all of this. And AAA, and it does seem like this is the case where perhaps Grandma's house is safer than the day clubs in Vegas.
Gary Grumbach, ever familiar with the day clubs in Vegas. Thank you, friend. Appreciate it. Have a great holiday. Remember at the beginning of the pandemic when we all talked about pandemic babies? It seemed like a lot of people were thinking about having kids during lockdown. Turns out that didn't move the needle on our population growth. It is the lowest since one very important birth, the birth of our nation, up just 1% from July 2020 to July 2021. So you might be asking why. Zincle Asamoah asked that question too. She finds out.
With the population declining, it could be because of our current circumstances with a pandemic. Times are seeming to be a lot more difficult.
Deanna Volek is in her late 30s. She's lived through a pandemic, finished law school during a recession, and as she looks to the future, she doesn't see children as a part of it.
I love children. I love the children in my life. It wasn't something I wanted to do myself.
Decisions like hers, one of many experts say, contributing to the U.S.'s stalled population growth, increasing by just 0.1% in the past year, a record low.
This is the smallest percentage decline in American history.
What are the key reasons we're seeing this decline in population rate?
Number one, COVID, which is affecting the death rate, but also fewer women are having children right now as well. COVID has also slowed down immigration into the United States. That was the other source of population growth to the country.
The U.S. death rate reached new heights, growing 17% in 2020, with the coronavirus added to the top leading causes of death. The average life expectancy diminishing for men, women, and groups across the board, with Black and Hispanic Americans facing the most dramatic increases. Doctors citing the effects of COVID as a primary cause.
Changes in access to routine medical care has worsened many of the outcomes related to chronic conditions, has delayed cancer screening, access to medications has gotten harder for many diseases as well.
Experts add it's not just wellness. Less people are choosing to have kids.
We do know that births have declined across all racial and ethnic groups.
25 states registered what Kenneth Johnson, a demographer, calls a natural decrease in population growth in 2020, which measures the number of births relative to the number of deaths. That change up from 8 states the year prior.
Are there factors about the world as it stands, specifically in the pandemic setting, that make you go, I don't think I want to do this?
With climate change and sustainability, how the world is going to be in the next decades, I think is a cause for concern for a lot of people.
Experts worry a shrinking population could have big consequences.
If, on the other hand, the birth rates don't rise again, that has implications that ripple through the whole economy and society.
As for individuals like Deanna, she says her personal choice not to have children has been met with support, and she hopes more support can be given for those pursuing parenthood in the pandemic world.
We don't have paid parental leave on a national level. Childcare is very expensive. I advocate strongly still for policies that support families, because we want to support the people that do decide to have children and make sure that if people make that decision, they're doing it in a supportive environment.
And it's worth noting, we still don't know what the full impacts of this population change will be, but experts point out that the effects will likely trickle down and impact the labor force in our economy and change the way we think about the healthcare industry and education moving forward. Hallie.
Zincle Esamoah with that reporting. Coming up here on the show, a congresswoman carjacked. Pennsylvania's Mary Gay Scanlon held at gunpoint Wednesday afternoon. Now 5 people are in custody. We've got more on that in the local. Plus, a new trend in the beverage industry that might change what it means to stay sober. I'll explain in tonight's original. There is a boom in the beverage industry, but not how you might think. It's all about booze-free booze. I'll show you what I mean in the original in just a second. But first, NBC News covers hundreds of stories every day. And because you couldn't possibly read or watch or listen to them all, our bureau teams have done it for you. This is what they tell us is going down in their regions in a segment we call The Local. From our Southeast Bureau, at least 4 people got hurt when a fire started at an ExxonMobil oil refinery in Texas. It happened 25 miles east of Houston on Wednesday. Officials say some kind of explosion happened inside the plant. They still don't know what or why, and they're trying to figure out the cause. Our Northeast Bureau reporting 5 people are now under arrest for the carjacking of a Pennsylvania congresswoman, Mary Gay Scanlon. Police say 2 armed men approached her Wednesday, demanded her car keys and her stuff, and one of them drove off in her car. The congresswoman was not hurt in this incident, and her car was later recovered in Newark, Delaware. And from our D.C. Bureau, kind of a bummer for conservators who spent 5 hours prying open a 130-year-old time capsule inside the pedestal of Confederate General Robert E. Lee's statue in Virginia. You'd think they would maybe hit the payload. They only got 3 books, including an almanac from 1875, a cloth envelope, and a silver coin. I mean, that's fine. They were hoping for a little more, though. Historical records led a lot of people to believe the capsule contained dozens of objects related to the Confederacy. Now, to tonight's original, with in-depth reporting on a topic we've been keeping an eye on. And as we head into 2022, maybe you're thinking about a dry January, or maybe you just want something celebratory and sophisticated to drink over the holidays this coming week without the hangover the next day. Listen, you are not alone. Booze-free booze is having a moment right now, exploding more than 100% over the past year, as more and more people think mindfully about how they drink and how they feel when they drink. So just how do you celebrate a very merry, sober, curious Christmas? Check it out. When you think Napa Valley, you think wine, right? Vineyard after gorgeous vineyard, the red, the white, the bubbly. But here, they're doing something a little different by taking the buzz out of the bottle.
What you end up with in the glass is a wine that tastes like wine, but it has all the alcohol removed.
Trinchero Family Estates makes Sutter Home Free, a line of 9 of the best-selling alcohol-free wines straight from California. And this isn't grape juice, far from it.
Our winemaking team goes through the full winemaking process, which means they turn all those natural sugars into alcohol through the fermentation process. It's got about half the calories of a traditional wine and much less sugar than something like a sparkling grape juice.
Bree Wold explains they spin the wine in a cone using centrifugal force to remove the alcohol, aiming to appeal to a market they expect to grow by more than 30% in the next 2 years. And they're not alone. Some estimates predict the non-alcoholic beverage market will grow from $923 million to more than $1.7 trillion by 2028. Already, there's been an explosion in the industry, with booze-free beer and cider sales jumping more than 30% last year. Non-alcoholic spirits up more than 100%.
Whether it's mocktails or mock tequila or even vodka, and of course the low or zero alcoholic beer. All of the big companies are getting in on this trend because if you think about the lifestyle these people are choosing, they still want to go out with their friends to bars and restaurants, and increasingly those bars and restaurants are giving them options for drinks with little or no alcohol.
Cheers. That includes places like the Columbia Room in Washington, where the sober curious get a warm welcome.
And then we're going to top it off with a sparkling non-alcoholic wine.
With classes like this one to teach folks how to mix booze-free drinks.
It's always nice to have other options, and I'm not getting any younger, and I don't have the time in my life to spend a day hungover.
I don't get to the gym as often as I do. I eat foods I shouldn't be eating for my health, but the best thing I can do and the easiest thing I do is just not drink.
You always have to settle for the Shirley Temple or something like that, so this really sophisticates drinks and brings them up to that adult level where you can feel like you're enjoying something that has the profile of an alcoholic drink, but not the alcohol if you don't like it.
It's that sober sophistication that's part of the appeal, and Derek Brown gets it.
It's so good.
He's one of the country's top mixologists, traveling the world and literally writing the book on cocktails. But a couple years ago, he went alcohol-free.
It was an identity shift because it was scary. The reason that I started changing the way I drink is because I had to address mental health issues in my life. And the thing is that in this industry, meaning the bar and restaurant industry, that's rampant.
I think about the last year and a half, almost 2 years now that all of us have had, and what you've seen, and if you think that's contributed to more people exploring the sober curious movement.
Yeah, I think so. I think in the sense that, we have all called a lot of things into question. When you have 2 years to think about things, a lot of things come up. And I think for some people it was, how do I drink? And is this the way I want to drink?
Because sometimes drinking better means not drinking alcohol at all.
That's right.
Call it conscious consumption, or as Brown puts it in his new book, mindful mixology, thinking about how you feel while you're drinking and the morning after. And importantly, offering options to people when they're enjoying a nice meal or a night out and want something more than just juice or seltzer.
You can take my word for it that non-alcoholic cocktails can be wonderful and enjoyable, and you can have just as much fun.
All of it pointing to signs that this Christmas, the holiday spirit may be spirit-free. Cheers.
Cheers.
I can attest from personal experience, the non-alcoholic cocktails were excellent. I'm mixing up a few for myself and my family over the holidays. So what do you get the person in your life who has everything, who maybe doesn't want a mocktail? What about Bitcoin? No, really, crypto, turning out to be a very hot gift idea this year. Jake Ward will tell us why next. Okay, by now you have probably already bought and wrapped up the gifts you got for your family and your friends for Christmas. Maybe, although if you're anything like my partner, you're kind of a last-minute person. If you're still wondering what the perfect gift might be, we have an idea for you. How about Bitcoin? Seriously. Turns out crypto is a hot gift for this year, and why wouldn't it be? According to Pew, 16% of Americans say they've invested in, traded, or used cryptocurrency. And according to research by the Motley Fool, 20% of Americans who have never owned crypto, that's about 50 million people, they are likely to buy it in the next year. So big market there, potentially. One of the top cryptocurrencies, Bitcoin, cost somewhere in the $10,000 range in 2020. Today, it's more than $50,000, almost a 400% increase. So who better to talk to about this than our resident crypto and tech guru geek correspondent Jake Ward to tell us about this very 2021 idea.
Hey.
Jake, pros and cons of gifting crypto, and what should we know if we want to get somebody crypto as a gift?
Well, let's see. Let's run through the pros and cons together, Hallie, because they are big and weird. I mean, the pros are it's highly versatile, right? A lot of folks will accept it these days. It is a little bit like giving out a gift certificate. You know, it might rise in value. As you mentioned, Bitcoin has gone up an incredible amount, and it is infinitely available. Nobody's going to, there's no supply chain issues with this digital currency. Now, here are the cons. If you don't know anything about it, it's pretty complicated. You have to have an exchange account already. You got to understand digital wallets. You got to understand the blockchain, all of that stuff. Hard to explain that to grandma. Number two, it's volatile. Just because it's worth $1 today or $10 today does not mean it's going to go up in value. It could be absolutely worthless in a little while. And then here's the other thing, Hallie. This stuff, according to people like Warren Buffett, Bill Gates, it's imaginary, right? It's totally worthless. It is literally a imaginary digital currency that is only valuable because other people think it's valuable. It is, in a weird way, a shared delusion. Now, if we really wanted to geek out here, we could get into the whole nature of paper money, which is also kind of a made-up thing, right? All of this is weird, but just the article of faith you have to go on. But this is the thing. This is why so many people are trying to gift it this year, is because you're going to have that one nephew, that one person who just is dead set on convincing you that this is the future, and that's why you're going to see so many people giving it out at this holiday season. It's so funny
you say that, because as you're talking, Jake, about what you called your weird pros and cons, which I loved, and listen, as you say, the shared delusion of currency is, I think we could spend a whole hour on. I think of, just to get personal, my college student brother-in-law, who's very into tech, cool stuff. I feel like this would be totally up his alley. And you know this, Jake. I know literally nothing about how I would even begin to gift crypto for him if I were going to do that, right? There's different kinds you can pick. If somebody was looking at that cons list and was like, all right, I'm good, I'm just going to do it. I'm just going to try it. Maybe just a couple bucks, whatever. How do we do it?
Well, so I can imagine, right, like you say, a brother-in-law, a nephew, with a couple of glasses of wine on them at the table trying to buttonhole you about how the crypto is going to work when they give it to you. And so in this particular case, you probably, if you're the gifter, if you're giving it out, you probably want to give one of the better-known ones. You want to give away something like Ethereum. You want to give away something like Bitcoin. You don't want to do, there's thousands of different cryptocurrencies, and a lot of those are going to simply disappear off the face of the earth at some point. And so going with one of the better-known ones is the thing to do. The easiest way to do it is if your recipient already has some sort of cryptocurrency account on an exchange, something like Coinbase. You can really make then a gift card and just give it to them, or if you have what's called their public address, you can give it to them that way. But it's easier for two crypto adherents to give things to each other than it is to convince your aunt who's never touched it before. But they're all, if you go on Coinbase or any of those sites, you're going to see lots and lots of opportunities to give it out. There are even some of them that give away gift certificates, although that is a whole scammy world that is also a little scary, so you got to be careful there.
That's a good...
But going with the best known brands, right? Bitcoin, Ethereum, these are the things to go with.
I'm just thinking, what if I wanted to give it to my mom, who knows nothing about this world? You know what I mean? Is that just a terrible idea? Should I just not do it for people who aren't into this universe?
Well, you can do it. You can do it. It's hard to surprise her with it, but in a way, maybe you don't want to surprise her with it, right? With something as strange as this. You would have to walk her through the process of setting up an account. There are places that you can do this, but yeah, it is complicated stuff, and I think it's going to be kind of an insular Christmas gift, at least for the moment.
I think she'd probably appreciate a plane ticket to D.C. instead, so maybe we'll go with that. Jake Ward, happy holidays, friend. Thank you so much for being on this show so much this year. We really appreciate it. We'll see you in the new year, Jake. And we'll see you all in the new year. That is a wrap for the rest of 2021 for us. Our staff's taking a little bit of a break. We're going to be off until January 3rd of 2022, and we come back hard and come back strong. Same time, same place then. You know how to find us. Happy holidays. Have an amazing new year. Please stay safe and stay healthy. Coverage picks up right now.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.